my parents are both pretty avid readers, and they have a lot of books, and I started looking through their books, and I pulled off books whose covers I liked. I hadn't heard of any of the authors, so that made no difference to me. And I didn't even bother reading the back. They just picked books whose covers I liked. And I started moving through them, and I found that I liked a lot of them. I didn't like a lot of them. A lot of them I thought were boring, or just I just didn't understand them. So I would stop. I'd give books maybe 5 pages, and if I didn't get through 5 pages, I would stop. And if I got through 5 pages, I would go further. And a lot of these books I finished. And what it instilled in me was not a love of books exactly, but a love of good books, which is different. And in a way, that difference was what allowed me to become a writer, because I started to think, well, maybe it's not the case that all books exist out there waiting for me to get smart enough to understand them. But instead, there are a lot of books published. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. And by good and bad, I don't mean in any objective way, just some are good for me and some are bad for me, in the same way that there are a lot of people out there, and some of them I want to be friends with and some of them I don't. And then I started thinking, now getting into college, well, what's the difference between a book and a good book? And what makes a good book good? And what do I mean when I say that a book is for me? And would it be possible to create a good book? Because nobody knows me better than me. So couldn't I theoretically make something that would feel like it was made for me even more than any book I'd ever read? And that was actually one of the reasons I started writing. And it's still a kind of guiding principle in my writing. Well, I've written a bunch of books, I guess, but these are the 3 bigger books, 2 novels and 1 work of nonfiction. The first was called Everything is Illuminated. I wrote the first draft of it when I was in college, and it was based on a trip I made to Eastern Europe, looking for a woman who saved my grandfather from the Nazis. So that story, he's the narrator of sort of half of that book, and the other half is a kind of imagined history of this place that they go to, this little tiny village in Eastern Europe that, in fact, my grandfather did come from, and was destroyed during the war. I went there in, I guess it was 1999? No, 97 even, 98, 97. And there's just nothing. I mean, nothing but nothing. There's no rubble. There's no you would have no reason to believe that a human being ever lived there. And yet it was once a very vibrant community of about 3,000 people. So about 4 years after that, I published my second book, which is called Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And the narrator of this book, my life had changed very much in between these 2 books. I became a published writer. When I sold Everything is Illuminated, I was a receptionist. I was living in Jackson Heights, Queens, and I had very, very little time to write or just to think about things and do things on my own. By the time I was working on my second book, I knew that I would have a publisher. I knew that the book would have some audience. I didn't know how big. I knew that I would be able to survive as a writer. And a lot happened in the world. September 11th happened. The internet happened. They made a movie out of Extremely Loud. It's coming out in about a week. And I was there a little bit while they were working on it. And at one point, the director said to me, "How can we get Oscar to have known about this little fact?" And I said, "Well, you should have just Googled it." And they said, "Well, people didn't really Google stuff before September 11th. And it's hard to remember that, but it's true. Google didn't even become a public company until 2004. It's amazing how the things that we feel are so integral to our lives just didn't exist that long ago at all. And Extremely Loud was written on the cusp of all of that change.